Okay, so today we're going to dive into a topic that I think a lot of people have strong feelings about,
Yeah.
illegal immigration.
hmm
And, obviously it's a tough one.
It is a complex issue.
And we're not here to point fingers
You're
or
right.
take sides.
Not at all.
We just really want to understand the impacts of this
Right.
on different people,
Exactly.
from the
Yeah.
workers themselves to, everyday consumers.
Absolutely.
Like you listening right now.
It's a complex web, for sure.
Yeah.
And it's easy to get caught up in the emotions of it all.
Right.
But I think the source material that we have for today's deep dive really grounds this conversation in a way that's helpful
Yeah.
by focusing specifically on the economic and societal consequences.
And it's laid out in a way that kind of makes you think, like, wait a
Yeah.
minute.
Mm-hmm.
I never considered that angle before.
Right.
So I think first up, we got to kind of tackle,
Okay.
who actually benefits from this whole situation.
Right.
The source mentions a bunch of different stakeholders,
Huh.
employers, consumers, even the government.
The economy as a whole,
Yeah.
society as a whole,
Society.
many stakeholders.
So I guess let's break it down one by one.
Okay, sounds good.
What about employers? How did they benefit?
Well, one of the things that the source points out is that for employers, especially in certain industries,
Yeah.
like agriculture, for example, where margins are already really thin,
Yeah.
it can mean lower labor costs,
Oh, okay.
which can be a huge benefit for them.
Right. So just from like a pure
Yeah,
business perspective.
really from a business
Yeah.
standpoint.
It makes sense.
Yeah,
But it does kind of make you wonder about the ethical implications of it all,
Mhm. Absolutely.
Like, are we as consumers unknowingly
Right.
supporting a system that could be taking advantage of people?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think the source does a good job of not shying away from that very moral dilemma. It points out that, yeah, consumers like you and me, we benefit from this because we get cheaper goods and services.
Right.
But those lower prices
Yeah.
might come at the expense of someone else's well-being.
It's tough.
Yeah,
It's a tough pill to swallow
it is.
because everybody likes
yeah,
saving money, right?
of course.
But not if it means that, someone else is suffering.
It is,
Yeah,
yeah, that happen.
And then, of course, you have the impact on the economy as a whole.
Yeah.
And the source talks about how, undocumented workers do contribute to economic growth.
Okay.
They work, they spend money, some even pay taxes.
So it's almost like there's this kind of like economic engine
Right.
running in the background.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not all
Yeah.
sunshine and roses, right?
No, of course not.
It's got to be some downsides too.
And the source acknowledges that,
Yeah.
for example, one of the potential downsides it talks about is the strain on social safety nets.
Public resources, especially in areas that have very high concentrations of undocumented immigrants.
Yeah.
So it's a very complex equation
Yeah. It feels like
with a lot of variables.
it's always this balance
Yes.
of trying to find,
Yeah.
economic growth versus protecting vulnerable people,
Right.
individual choices versus societal consequences.
Absolutely.
It's never easy.
It's this constant tension.
Yeah.
And then you bring in the government.
Right.
What role do they play in all of this? And they face this challenge of enforcing immigration laws
Yeah.
while also trying to manage these economic and social realities on the
And I
ground.
can't imagine being in their shoes.
It's a tough spot to be in,
Yeah.
for sure.
But the source does mention that they benefit in some ways, right?
Well, indirectly, yes.
Mm.
They receive some tax revenue from undocumented workers, even if it's not through, traditional income tax channels.
Yeah.
But of course, the costs associated with things like, border security, detention centers, legal processes, all of that
Yeah.
likely outweighs those gains.
So it's not like they're profiting off of this.
No, it's not a...
They're just kind of caught in this web
Exactly.
of complexity, too.
Just like everybody else.
And then, of course, we can't forget about society as a whole.
Yes.
I mean, what about...
The source talks about the
Yeah.
potential for cultural enrichment,
Right.
the diversity that immigrants bring, regardless of their legal status.
I mean, and that's a really important point, right?
Absolutely.
Keep an eye
These
on-
aren't just nameless, faceless statistics.
Right.
These are people who are contributing to our communities in a myriad of ways.
They're our neighbors,
They are.
our coworkers, our friends.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They're enriching the fabric of our society.
But of course, the source acknowledges that there are challenges, too.
Of course, there are always two sides to every coin.
What are some of those challenges?
Well, things like increased social tensions.
Okay.
Especially in communities where resources are already stretched thin,
Makes sense.
and it's easy to see how misunderstandings
Yeah.
prejudices can arise
Right.
in those kinds of situations,
Especially when people are...
especially when people are struggling.
Yeah.
And then the source also doesn't shy away from the really uncomfortable truth that undocumented immigrants are often much more vulnerable
Yeah.
to exploitation and abuse
Right.
because they lack that legal status.
And that brings us back to, that ethical dilemma we talked about earlier.
It does.
It's like
It's a thread that runs through this entire issue.
yeah, it's like every
Yeah.
every layer of this is tied to like the really
A difficult choice.
difficult choice. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm feeling overwhelmed.
It is a lot to take in.
Yeah.
But don't worry, the source doesn't leave us hanging.
Okay.
It doesn't just point out the problems and say, see you later.
Okay, good.
It actually delves into some potential solutions that we
Oh.
can talk about.
All right, well, let's get into those then.
Sounds good. Okay, so let's talk solutions.
Right.
One that comes up all the time is comprehensive immigration reform.
Yeah, I feel like I hear that phrase a lot.
It gets thrown around.
But what does it actually mean in practice?
So basically, it's about creating a pathway to legal status
Okay.
for undocumented immigrants who meet certain requirements.
Okay, like what?
Things like paying taxes,
Mhm.
having a clean record, showing that they're committed to integrating into society, that kind of stuff.
So it's kind of like saying, look, we know you're here.
Yeah.
We know you're contributing.
Right.
Let's make it official.
Let's figure out a way to make this work.
But I'm sure it's not.
Oh, it's a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a highly politically charged issue.
Oh, yeah.
You've got strong opinions on both sides.
Totally.
Some people argue that it rewards people who broke the law, while others see it as a necessary step towards a fairer system.
It's hard to find common ground when it's
It is.
so emotionally charged,
Sure.
What other solutions does the source talk about?
Okay, so another option that's often discussed is guest worker programs.
Oh, yeah.
And these programs provide legal avenues
Right.
for temporary workers
Gotcha.
to come in and fill specific labor shortages.
So it's kind of like a temporary work visa.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's tailored to, the needs of particular industries.
But does that actually address
Right.
the root causes of, why people
Right. That's the big question.
immigrate illegally in the first place?
That's a really good point,
Yeah.
because guest worker programs might offer kind of a short-term fix, but they don't necessarily address the underlying issues like poverty,
Yeah.
violence, all the things that are pushing people
Yeah.
to leave their home countries in the first place.
Right. It's like putting a Band-Aid
It is.
on a much deeper wound, right?
Exactly.
What else?
So the source also emphasizes the need to just enforce existing labor laws more effectively.
Okay. How would that work?
Well, if you crack down on employers who are hiring undocumented workers,
Uh-huh.
it could help level the playing field.
Right, because if businesses know that they can't get away with,
Yeah.
exploiting cheap labor,
Right.
then they might be more inclined to hire legal workers
Exactly.
and pay them fair wages.
Exactly. So stronger enforcement could really protect those vulnerable workers
Oh, okay.
and encourage businesses to actually operate within the law.
Is there a downside to that, too?
Well, of course, there's always another side to consider.
Okay, like what?
Increased enforcement could also have the unintended consequence
Okay.
of pushing undocumented workers further into the shadows,
Oh, I see.
which could make them even more susceptible to exploitation and abuse.
Right.
So it's a very delicate balance.
Yeah, it feels like every solution
Right.
has its own set of unintended consequences.
It's a complex issue, and there are going to be trade-offs.
Yeah.
No matter what we do.
Are there any other solutions in the source?
The last big one that the source really focuses on is investing in public services,
Okay,
particularly in areas with high concentrations of immigrants.
that makes sense.
Providing resources for things like education,
Yeah.
healthcare, social services, all of that.
That would make a big difference.
It can help integrate immigrants into society
Right.
and kind of ease the strain on those communities.
It's about making sure that everybody has a chance to,
Yeah.
succeed and contribute.
Regardless of where they came from.
Right, regardless of their background.
Exactly.
So we've got comprehensive reform,
Mm-hmm.
guest worker programs,
Yep.
stricter law enforcement,
Right.
and investing in public services.
It seems like it's going to take a multi-pronged approach.
Yeah, there's no easy fix.
There's no magic bullet here, that's for sure.
There's something this complicated.
And ultimately, finding a solution that actually works for everyone
Right.
is going to require a lot of honest conversation, compromise,
Yeah.
and a willingness to see things from multiple perspectives.
Yeah, it's not about picking sides
No.
or pointing fingers. It's about,
It's about recognizing
yeah,
the nuances
Yeah.
and trying to find solutions that are both humane and sustainable.
And I think the source does a good job of kind of laying out that framework.
I think so too. It encourages us to move beyond
Yeah.
just the kind of like surface level rhetoric
Right.
and really engage in a more nuanced and thoughtful conversations
Very
about
cool.
this issue.
Yeah, about how to actually create an immigration system that is both just and effective.
Yeah, exactly.
It's easy to get kind of lost in all the, economic arguments and the political debates.
Yeah,
But I think we got to remember the human side of all this.
absolutely.
You're talking about real people here,
Real people with families and hopes and dreams.
Yeah. And the source actually spends some time talking about that,
Right.
the humanitarian concerns
Yeah.
surrounding illegal immigration. And it's heavy stuff.
It is. It's not easy to read,
Yeah.
but it's important.
What kind of things does it highlight?
Well, it talks about the journeys that a lot of these people make, the
Yeah.
risks they take,
Yeah.
They're literally risking their lives to cross borders
Right.
in search of a better life.
And even once they're here,
Yeah.
that lack of legal status makes them super vulnerable.
Incredibly vulnerable.
to All kinds of things.
Exploitation,
Yeah.
trafficking, abuse, you name it.
It's hard to even imagine what some people go through
It is.
just for a chance at something better.
Just for the opportunity
Yeah.
to improve their lives.
It makes all those, policy debates
Right.
suddenly feel very real.
very real very quickly.
Yeah.
It really humanizes the issue.
So knowing all that,
Yeah.
how do we balance
Right. How do we...
the need for border security
Yeah.
with those human concerns?
That's the million-dollar question,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
It requires us to kind of walk this tightrope,
Yeah.
enforcing the law while also upholding our values
Right.
of compassion and human dignity.
It's not an easy task.
It's a challenge
Yeah.
for any society, but it's one we have to face.
Maybe it starts with shifting the conversation
Okay, how so?
away from fear
Okay.
and more towards understanding,
Oh, that's a good place to start, yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
because the solutions are going to require real dialogue,
absolutely.
thoughtful, creative solutions,
Yeah.
and a willingness to see things from other people's perspectives.
I think that's key.
Yeah.
It's about empathy.
This deep dive has really been eye-opening.
It's a complex issue
Yeah.
with a lot of different angles.
And it's not as simple as
No.
right and wrong,
Yeah, it's not black and white. There's a lot of gray area.
Yeah, and a lot of different perspectives to consider.
Absolutely.
And I'm leaving this conversation feeling like the weight of the challenge, but also kind of hopeful in a way.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think the fact that we're having this discussion, that
Yeah.
we're trying to understand, is a step in the right direction.
Knowledge is power, right?
Absolutely.
And understanding is how we create change.
Well said.
So to everyone listening, I think the question we all have to ask ourselves
Yeah.
is how can we, as individuals,
Yeah.
as a society,
As a community.
contribute to creating a more just and humane immigration system?
That's a powerful question to leave people with.
Yeah, and thanks for guiding us through this. It's been a lot to take in.
It's been a pleasure.
And to all of you listening,
Yes.
thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
And keep asking questions.
Keep learning
Keep learning.
and keep the conversation going.
Absolutely.